Oh my God.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sovereign Village Project and the Community Hour. We're always happy to be back here. This is the first video we've done in a while. You might have noticed that I've been a little bit absent this week. You might also notice that we are in work clothes and do not look very classy right now. And both of those things are for the same reason, which is that we are working like crazy to get our house finished. I decided to go ahead and sell this before the house was finished. So we have basically 3 weeks now to get our house put to a livable condition. So we are just around the clock pounding it, dawn till dusk and then past dusk, to the point where we didn't even have time to change. We didn't really think much about a topic today because we are just working. We've been mainly doing drywall all day today. We have the drywall delirium that you get from endless cutting and making mistakes and recutting.
Measuring the wrong.
Yeah, and we're coming off of the insulation lung from doing that. So it's been quite a journey, and we're learning a lot as we go. But that's what gave us the idea for the topic today, which is building in collapse. Building.
That's kind of exactly what we did.
Exactly, and what we're doing, and what all of us are doing in the homesteading world, because it's obviously harder than ever to build anything. You can't get materials. It's really hard to get employees. It's hard to get anyone to work for you. Nobody wants to work because they're getting all of that hyperinflated money thrown at them, so they don't work, so that everything will collapse. And so those of us who are aware of what's going on in the world, we are all rushing to try to get ourselves and our families prepared for this and to build out our homesteads and become self-sufficient. And doing that in the midst of supply chain collapse and a collapsing economy is quite the challenge.
We had to take a lot of that into consideration, especially last year, as we were preparing.
Fortunately, we were very aware and watching really closely what was going on. And so we were buying lumber before the lumber went crazy. We got it like about a week before it skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And getting all of our things lined up. I'm such a doomsdayer that every week I've been expecting like an EMP to hit. So I'm just like, we're always trying to stay ahead of everything and have all of our supplies on the ground. But this topic today, building in collapse, I want to talk more broadly about it, like building your family's wealth, building your legacy, building like communities, building wealth, security, building homesteads, building a lot of things in the midst of collapse. Because I think times of collapse are actually times of opportunity as well. You can look back at the Great Depression, you can look back at any era of solar minimum, and you can see the winners and losers. The losers are those that did not prepare and they were a victim of circumstances. And then there are those of us who take advantage of circumstances and we prepare ourselves and our families, because there are trends that, like, if a market collapses, somebody always gets really rich in a market collapse. That's just a metaphor. I'm not talking about getting into the stock market. I think that's pretty foolish in most cases. But collapse is a time of opportunity. It's a time of resetting. And obviously, most of us here are probably aware of the resetting happening, the Great Reset and all of that garbage that the wonderful folks at all of these international organizations are trying to do. But it is a reset of sorts, and we can use a reset to our advantage, or we can fall victim to it.
And it's an opportunity to find people whose values align with yours.
Yes.
Which is what we're really realizing over the past year and a half.
Yeah.
I think more of those people have kind of gravitated towards us, or maybe we gravitated towards them.
Yeah. And you start taking it more seriously. I think in the past, we were off in La La Land and we didn't really think about getting to know people who were like-minded. And now we're thinking about that a lot. We've gotten to know as many neighbors as we can, and every day we're meeting another neighbor who values liberty, values sustainability, values nature, values self-sufficiency, values family. And meeting up with these people and bringing them into our lives have made us such richer people. Like we love our lives so much more having those people in our lives, and the people we've met through this channel. It's very much the same. So it's also about building connections, building community, building neighborhoods. All this, it's a time to build or it's a time to collapse, and we have the choice to do either. So we're focusing on building. And so I kind of want to talk about a real random smattering of concept of ideas and like how we're going about building, and see what ideas that spurs in all of y'all.
All of you guys, yeah. Stories too.
I'm also not sure we're seeing the chats right now, so I'm going to bring up my phone real quick and see if I can see them in there.
Oh yeah. Recognize that.
Because we haven't had a chance to say hello to everybody yet. Oh yeah, we have a ton of comments. So our laptop was not showing comments, but we have tons of comments. So we've got Reliance Trust in there. He says he'll be watching it afterwards. Reliance on Trust. One of the first comments in the comment section there. I would follow his channel. He puts out a lot of great information. He's doing permaculture out of Oregon, which is my home state originally. We got Homesteading in the Heartland. Hello, good seeing you, Aaron. I'm excited to hear about the well. Yeah, we talked about the well on the last one, I believe, or the one before that. Hello, Islin. Is that how you pronounce that? Homesteading the Heartland. There's plenty of lumber stacked up, hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
My neighbor was just telling us that.
Yeah, a lot of our neighbors, and we've been watching the sawmills around us, and there's been a lot of price gouging, although I don't think that's the only reason. A lot of it is also because the Fed is pushing a lot of their hyperinflated garbage money into housing. And so everything about housing is skyrocketing, and everybody's trying to build a house as a result. And it's all just this big chain reaction where they know they're in the position to then take advantage and exercise the monopoly that a lot of timber companies have to drive prices up. I've been watching and following some commodity reports that suggest lumber may be coming down in the next few weeks somewhat. I think it'll stay kind of hyperinflated, but there may be a little bit of relief in sight as far as lumber is concerned. Homesteading the Heartland says this is going to be worse than the Great Depression. Absolutely, so much worse. The fall itself looks like it's going to be worse financially, but also we're coming into a situation where people can't farm. They don't have families. They don't live in communities. They live in cities. They don't know their neighbors. They're suspicious of their neighbors. They've been pumped full of hatred and vitriol through the media and social media for a couple of years. They're scared of their neighbors. They're dependent on government. They don't have any skills, actually. They have things like they can do data entry, but that's not a skill. That's pushing a button. That's just following instructions. So they have no skills. They can't grow food. They have no homes to go back to. There's no family farms to go back to. The Great Depression, at least people had it was horrifying. The Great Depression, I mean, people starved on American soil, and everyone knew how to grow food practically. And everyone practically had family farms to go back to. So compare that to nowadays, when a lot of the people our age are completely disassociated from the communities they grew up in. They live in some city somewhere else. Their parents live far away. Their parents are about to have all their money and take it in the stock market crash, just like they took it from the boomers in 2008. They're going to take everything that's left. And so there's not going to be all these fallback plans. And of course, when we reach all those financial horrors is when I'm sure the solution will be offered by those that kind of run our society. They'll be like, oh, just sign on the dotted line, sign away your rights, sign away your liberty, sign away your money, and just kind of come into our technocratic smart cities and you'll be fine. So it's going to be far worse than the Great Depression, I would agree. And that's why we're building so fast. Just today we saw a lot of creepy propaganda come across of our social media feeds, and we were trying to find the motivation this morning to go out and do drywall all day on Sunday.
Like, oh,
that was our motivation. We're like, okay, yep, everything's still falling apart. Let's go drywall all day. But so many good folks in the hostile MGTOW. Good seeing you. As time goes on after the collapse, push comes to shove, you can just use a wood out in nature to build with. Buy lots of nails to help with this. Absolutely wonderful point. If you can get a timbered lot or have access to a timbered lot, and then you stock up on the nails and or the tools, especially hand tools, but also drills, something to charge that drill with, maybe just a little Harbor Freight solar panel to charge the drill with. We have a good 5-acre timber lot with a lot of mature oak. In our barn, we're going to do cordwood probably. And probably next time we build a house, we're not going to do anything we do is going to be natural building supplies. We were watching a video a while back about it was a historical account of a traveler who was, I think he was down in Virginia in the very early days, like late 1600s, early days of the founding of America. And they came across this early settler family out there, and they were living without a roof on their house. They had a house built, they had a cabin built, but these people were really poor, and they didn't have nails, so they couldn't build a roof on their house. So that's, to his point, buy nails and screws. We were just talking about buying a big bucket of deck screws, or probably a few buckets. Spending a few $100s on those now could be a huge investment into your future, because with natural materials, there's so much you can build, especially if you can figure out the roof part of the equation. We'll probably stock tools, nails, and roofing. Mm-hmm. But with that, you can then build. You can build with cordwood, which is like stacking, like wood you would use in a stove. You can build with cordwood. You can build with log. You can mill it if you have a mill and you stock a little bit of diesel up. There's a lot of ways to manufacture your building supplies. We've got a shed out here on this property, which we've just probably sold. And it was just 4 poles sunk in the ground and then rough cut timber and then sheet metal on top. And that thing has stood for decades and has served every person on this property really well as an outbuilding. Yeah. So yeah, natural. So that actually beat me to, that was one of the points I was going to bring up as we talk about building into collapse. It would be good to look at all of your future projects and think, how can I keep this away from supply chains? And what do I need to get now? Like maybe you're thinking about a barn or a house or a cabin in the future. You might want to get that metal now if you can afford it. The sheet metal, the nails, the deck screws, whatever you need for this building, the wiring. But then you might figure out like, okay, do I have access to timber? Can I do cob? Are there building codes? You know, what can you use from around you to build with? Because people were building for many millennia before we ever had a Home Depot or a Lowe's in the neighborhood. And we're going to go back to that again. And in a lot of ways, those building styles are superior. Often they're a little bit slower, but they're cheaper. And when you save money on something, it's not just the money you save on it. You're also not having to drive to Lowe's to get it. You're not having to drive to work to get that fiat currency to get it. You're not having to pay taxes. You're not having to pay $1 for every 75 cents that you actually have to spend. So using natural materials has so many advantages. We only didn't do that because we were in such a hurry to get this property up, because we're building in collapse. And so we would just want to get all the materials on the ground. So we went with a standard kit. But
and I think it's important to definitely do it with kind of your final home or your final, things that you are viewing as you'll never leave or never not be using them.
And a lot of people have many, fairly well-reasoned objections to natural building. For example, around here, a lot of people say you shouldn't build with wood because the bugs are going to eat it. The carpenter bees are going to eat it. Well, if a carpenter bee wants to eat through a 16-inch to 24-inch cordwood solid piece of lumber to get to the interior of the house, he can try. But also you can stay in it, you can treat it, you just have to maintain your house. And yeah, maybe in 100 years, they will get to it. And maybe a house should decompose. Maybe a house should just be made out of metal, wood, and stone, and concrete, and fairly natural things that can then, in 100 years, 200 years, go back into the earth and feed that soil again. Why can't our houses be the same way our plants are?
Yeah.
I'm very excited for our next house to not use insulation and not use poisons and chemicals. I think it's the way to go, even if we weren't building in collapse. But also, as we talk about building in collapse, I want to talk about the financial aspects of that as well. But I'm sure we have more chats. Sorry, I have to do this so archaically. We normally have a chat feed on the laptop here, but we're in quite a hurry to set up, and we're improvising. Centerline Preparedness says, hello to y'all. Strange days we found ourselves in. Strange days indeed. Do you ever just wake up and just feel like you're in an alternate timeline, or somebody's writing a movie and you're in it, or some kind of time traveler came back and messed with something? These are the strangest times, but they're also really fun. It's fun to watch all of these crazy patterns play out and to be in this juncture of history, which is truly a reset. I think even before the IMF and all of these supervillains, wannabe supervillains, came out with ideas like the Great Reset, we were headed for this anyway, because our entire civilization is built on the use of fossil fuels, and it's built on our modernized agriculture, monocultures, growing massive amounts of corn and grain and commodities like that in the Midwest. All of that's propped up with fossil fuels and with a very narrow set of growing conditions. You can only grow this GMO corn or soybeans in a certain narrow window. As the solar minimum pushes those growing regions down, it's going to mess up all of those growing regions. And at the same time, our population versus the affordability of fossil fuels is kind of reaching that peak, I think. At least it's going to in the next few decades. And so I actually think the elites, we like to see them as James Bond villains petting a white cat and cackling, but I think they're running scared too. I think the Bill Gates of the world and all these guys, they're running scared because they see collapse on the horizon, and they're just trying to build their little kingdoms. And that's why I think you see this strange mixture of globalism. They're trying to build this global government, but at the same time, you see things kind of coming apart, it seems, a little bit, and people building little empires and city-states almost. We've been watching a lot of the mega regions type development coming from the American Development Association, I believe they're called. They're very involved in our area, and they're trying to influence policy and basically carve up mega cities. Like here, it'd be rooted in Nashville, but we're an hour away from Nashville and would still include our county. And it's basically because it seems like they're setting up city states. So basically, these people who have a lot of money and power, or family money that they've had for generations, they're panicking, knowing what's on the horizon because they have access to better information. They know about the solar minimum. They know about all of the peak in our topsoil and in phosphate and important agricultural chemicals and oil and things like that. And so they're just trying to set themselves up for collapse, and the inevitable result is tyranny.
Yeah.
Because they want to lock down.
Yeah, Christian Amore says Klaus Schwab was pretty clear that they will establish a green economy.
And they will not. They will call it a green economy, but really they'll build hellscape giant cities and skyrise project housing. It's just going to be ghettos, and it will be horrible for the environment. And they will continue to extract our resources from the country and feed them into the city, and they'll exploit us as well. So it won't be green, but it'll be green in name. Yes, it will be solar powered. That's just because they want to make sure all of their cities of slaves don't have very much. Because really, if you think about it, if you look at an apartment in Hong Kong that's maybe 8 feet wide and 16 feet long, you don't need a lot of energy to run that. And if your food is basically just insect proteins and recycled urine, you don't need a lot of energy. So that's going to be their green economy. It's just going to be austerity. It's going to be poverty. That's their green economy. Because, we both, especially me, I come from a very poverty-stricken background. So I know real poverty. And, we lived really green. We went out and we chopped firewood because we didn't have central heating. And we grew our food because we didn't have food. So yeah, poverty is pretty green. We're just kind of choosing a more elegant version of poverty that will actually build wealth. Am I missing any more comments there? Hostile McTell says screws, hammers, nails, drills. Yeah, those tools are invaluable. I just bought another drill tomorrow that I don't need. I just wanted to have another drill and more batteries and a way to charge them. And an electric chainsaw. If you can get an electric chainsaw, you could trickle charge that probably with solar power, even if they cut off gas, because our access to gasoline is completely dependent on supply chains. And we saw what happened when they shut down the pipeline and made up the cyber attack false flag, most likely. We saw what happened. We can lose access in an instant, so we can't depend on that. Whereas electricity, you could, at least for a few decades until your solar panels break down, you can't replace them. Even if they cut off everything, you could still charge your tools.
They're homesteading in the heartland says they're just accelerating it, modern ag all around us, and we need to get back to basics for real without the big implements.
The big implements are just a drag on a farm. I grew up in farm country. Everyone told Gabby, she grew up in the Midwest, don't farm. You're not going to make a living farming. Well, yeah, if you follow their method, you won't. If you fall for their subsidies and go into the big ag and monocultures, and you have to buy a $200,000 tractor and get a giant bank loan, yeah, you're going to fail. Don't go super into debt. If you're going deeply into debt, you're going to lose. Q Fuquay says, we're actually going to solar maximum. The sun is waking up. Coupled with our weakening magnetic field, the solar max cycle is going to be off the charts in the next several years. So yeah, I'm still digging into the science of this because there are small solar minimums. There are small cycles of the sun, and then there are larger overarching ones. And it's kind of in the theoretical stage right now as people try to determine what's going on. Because the small solar cycle, I think it was solar cycle 25, has ended now. But we may be in more of a moderate minimum length solar cycle as well. I don't know. That science is beyond my ability to do the research on all of that deeply right now. So as a result, I'm just preparing for a varied climate because no matter what happens, the climate's being crazy and it's going to keep being crazy. So that's why I'm doing permaculture and very varied plantings and preparing for more rainfall or less rainfall, more drought, more sun, less sun, different temperatures. When you plant diversely, none of that really matters that much. But that's a good point. And also it is a good point that the sun is coming back, at least partially, it's coming back into a more active cycle with more sunspots, with more geomagnetic storms. And with a weakened magnetic field, we are possibly looking at a Carrington type event where, that happened in the Civil War. And it actually really altered how the Civil War went because all the telegraph lines went down. I'm sure anybody that's watching this channel follows other prepper channels and channels like this, and we all are aware that that's of the very real possibility of that. And I also think that's part of the panic of these elites because that's out of their control. They can control a lot of stuff, but you can't control the sun. That's why so many cultures worshipped it for so long because to them it was a god because you can't control it. You can do our ability to control the sun is a long way away. We would be like a Kelvin type 2 society or something, but. So I do agree somewhat, but I'm not really prepared to debate or really have any scientific opinion. And you shouldn't listen to me for very scientific opinions. Listen to me for how to garden like a redneck. That's the only thing I'm qualified to talk about.
JT says Bayer buying Monsanto pretty much pushed me into growing my own food. When Big Pharma buys big. That's exactly.
Yeah. There was a couple of factors that made me move out to the country, and that was one of them. When I said, "Oh, this Nazi former slave-holding company with a deep history that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but basically horrifying monster human beings and elite families that have been Nazis and torturers of humanity who own Bayer. The people that make money from medicine.
To do experiments on twins and crazy things
that company's been involved in a lot of dark stuff. So not only are they a morally reprehensible company, but they also they make money from us being sick. And now they own the other most morally reprehensible company known to man, Monsanto, which produces our food. So the people that make money from us being sick are growing our food. Time to grow your own food. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you think things are collapsing or you think everything's going to be magically hunky-dory. You got to grow your own food. You don't want to put that in your mouth. My brother-in-law farms my husband's farm's land, and they're struggling here in North Dakota with the 130-year drought. Finally got good rain. That's great. Last night, for the first time all year. Yeah, people need to pivot and adjust and wake up to the reality. Wake up to the reality that now is not the time to sell commodities anymore. The government has screwed you over. The USDA has been altering data for a long time because they want to F over the farmers, and they've done it successfully. They've done it for a century. It's just like all welfare. They give you a gift. Here's some free money. We're going to give all these big commodity monoculture farmers free money, and then they become dependent, and then they drag all the prices of food way down to poverty levels to where it's not really practical to grow food at all, and then they yank the rug out from under them. So 130 acres, that would have it doesn't matter if it's in North Dakota. There's people doing permaculture way further up north than that. There's time for perennials, time for mixed crops. It's time to break away from those commodity systems or starve and then have your land taken by the government and stuck into conservation or whatever. Like, wake up, farmers. Farmers need to wake up. You need to forget this rift between permaculture practitioners and traditional farmers. I come from traditional farming background. Gabby comes from farm country. And I understand how annoying permaculture people can be. Half of them are barefoot hippies, and they're really annoying, and they're not grounded in reality, because in the end we still have to feed billions of people right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we do need to transition away from that. That doesn't mean you need to stop production on your farm. That doesn't mean you can never plant corn or never plant grains. Fieldwork is a great podcast for large scale farmers on how these guys are figuring out how to transition to cover cropping and less tilling, but not no-till. They're actually doing a reasonable transition. So there's a way to do that. And also start planting out your nut trees and your fruit trees now. It's going to take a decade to really get good production.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're in North Dakota, if you're anywhere within like an hour or two of a good-sized city or suburb, there's going to be a huge market for these little specialty crops. If you have 130 acres, at least plant 1 acre as a market garden or a quarter of an acre outside of the house. Like, diversify, for goodness sakes. Like, what kind? We've seen businesses. We were talking to a trout farmer out here. We've seen what happens to businesses that don't diversify. They have one income stream,
Mm-hmm.
and as soon as something happens, a pandemic or a scamdemic or anything, one factor changes, and suddenly their business is toast. That's not how you do anything. You diversify your garden, diversify your business.
And then what they do is they go all into that,
Yeah.
the new shift, and then they don't.
Yeah, and then they get rug pulled out from under them again. So yeah, folks in North Dakota, Iowa, Indiana, all these big grain growing breadbasket regions, they got to wake up out of the farm matrix they're in and realize there's life beyond commodity grains. But also they're very important. And we don't need to just stop having that kind of farming. We need to find better solutions while still being real about our need to feed billions of people.
And how much land we
Yeah,
need to
Pfizer
feed
and Bayer
billions of
supplied experimental meds and VCs to Hitler. Yeah, just like now. They were involved in genocide then, and they're involved in genocide now. The genocide that is occurring to our family, our friends, and our neighbors. That's a whole nother rabbit hole, but go ahead and go onto the VAERS website and look at the government data on how many thousands of vaccine-related injuries there are now, and realize that on the website it says their data is 6 weeks behind. So that's 6 weeks ago data when they were just ramping up the vaccines. But also that's like how many of those actually got reported? What's the timeline that a hospital has to report? Because all of the personal accounts I've heard of people being hurt or killed have been several weeks after they got the shot. So several weeks go by after the shot, and then like, what do you know they died of? How do you know they died of that or went blind or had a blood clot? Related to that, how can you prove any of that? So how many of those are even getting reported? So when I think about what that data extrapolates to now, given another 6 week delay on top of all of that, I believe that we're about to see some crazy things. I could be wrong. Maybe this vaccine was for something else, but it looks like it might get a little rough there. And so, yeah, those same companies like Pfizer, and you can look back at Johnson & Johnson and Moderna and look at all the lawsuits and the people they've intentionally killed. You can look around at communities like this where those companies have pumped opioids and amphetamines into these communities and then sponsored legislation to prevent cannabis from being grown because they want to take away the natural plant medicines and build dependence on their death drugs. These companies kill people and torture people for profit. That's what they do. It's what they've always done. Love seeing you in work mode. New York Redneck says #dirty AF. Yes, we are dirty AF right now. We are sweaty, hot, and cold. In fact, I don't normally do this, but we decided to pour ourselves an ice cold natty daddy that's how hard we've been working.
Also, #dirty AF is.
And by ice cold, I mean lukewarm. Homesteading the Heart saying, yep, VC used to kill my grandma. I'm sorry to hear that. My dad wouldn't listen to me, and I used to work as a nurse and have a medical background.
Wow.
Majority of my family didn't want to listen to me. Yeah, mine too. My family, which is strange because we're kind of rednecks, but a lot of them have just been absorbed right into the matrix, and I fear for them. I asked them not to. I pled my case, but in the end, it's their decision, and I couldn't change their mind. Homesteading the Heartland says within 6 hours she couldn't breathe and has had clots in lungs. 3 weeks later died. She was 90 and lived a long, full life, but she was up and mobile and partially independent. I'm sorry to hear that. And people, Wake up. Like, do you think Homesteading the Heartland like just came here just to troll and make up a story? I've got friends who did not post anything. They don't post anything political. They didn't post anything about the pandemic. And I see their testimonials now on social media saying, my nephew, my 10-year-old or 15-year-old nephew just went blind. Blindness and blood clots are what I'm seeing a lot of. And what's going to happen when this reaches, if this truly reaches a big proportion of people suddenly realize that they've been duped? What's going to happen to society? What's going to happen to the world when millions of people realize that the folks like us screaming about, hey, maybe like people in power do bad things.
Yeah.
What happens if they all wake up and they suddenly decide like they start looking sideways at doctors and hospitals? I'm mad about doctors and hospitals too.
I know people are already doing that.
Yeah.
I mean,
what happens when the pitchforks get broken out and they start burning down and tearing down things that we also do rely on for healthcare? That's another thing to prepare for. So as you build into collapse, maybe if you have any kind of background or interest in medical stuff, maybe think about that as a career option. As you build, you need to build skills. So maybe go into herbalism. There's tons of cool free online resources. Maybe learn basic things. Maybe go join your local fire department like we did, and we can get access to free medical training, CPR classes. Learn to work on yourself and work on your family. Obviously, there's only so much you can do, but that can be a career, but it can also just be a way you serve your family and your neighbors and community is by being the healthcare practitioner. Homesteading the Heartland says, I left my homesteading career because 2 of my 3 kids had vaccine injuries. My daughter developed POS titer for lupus within 7 days of HPV, which was the first recombinant mRNA test on kids first. Sorry, some of those words are a little bit beyond me. Yeah, I had a niece who my sister was very nervous about vaccines. She wasn't feeling good about it. My niece was healthy, and she finally decided, she just decided to follow the advice of her doctors, and she vaccinated her, and my niece is now autistic. So I don't care what anybody says. I don't care how much they try to discredit people. That's what they would do, is try to discredit people. If you're a meth dealer and somebody's saying, hey, this meth is bad for people, you're going to say, you're silly, and you'll gaslight, and you'll make fun of people. You notice when they attack anti-vaxxers, they make fun of you. And they try to make you out to be an idiot. It's all ad hominem attacks. They don't ever defend their position. Vaccines do bad things. And I've had vaccines, and I'm not against the concept. Although I'll never take another one again, because now I'm at the point where if a virus is natural, then shouldn't it run its course? Is nature supposed to happen or not? If there's a population issue in any, an elk population, there will be a virus that goes through that elk population to bring it to sustainable levels. How dare we fight nature? And if it's not natural, then why are we not at war with whoever released it? Oh yeah. Because we released it, because we are at war, but it's our government and the corporations that own them are at war with people like us. This is fun. This was going to be about building, but it's just reading comments and ranting. I love community hour so much, y'all. This is so refreshing, especially because I haven't been able to make videos this week, so we've really been missing talking to everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for being patient with us.
Yes. But we are kind of talking about building, because as we talk about survival and trying to guess what's going to happen in the future, these are the factors we need to know. I'm going to go into a real weird rabbit hole, but it's got a point. Stick with me. So a lot of us love conspiracy theories, right? And everybody, the first thing you learn when you're researching conspiracy theories is like the eye on the pyramid and the dollar. And a lot of people think like, oh, that's an Illuminati symbol, and maybe it has been used by that organization. But those symbols go way back into prehistory. And all that symbol really means is the eye, he who garners the most, who pays the most attention and garners the most information, sits at the top of the hierarchy. That's all that means. So yes, people use that for evil ends because they're like, oh, I can be at the top of the hierarchy, and they get there and they love their absolute power. But also, we as people should think about that. The more knowledge we amass of not just like skills, but also what's happening around us, the more intelligence we gather, the better we can make our position. I don't remember how I got onto that, but that's where I was going with that point. New York Redneck says, yeah, no joke, destroyed my niece. My friend's grandpa was healthy. Yeah. How many testimonials do we have just in this comment thread? So many. Nature self-corrects. Yeah, just read through all the testimonials. Do you really think that all these people came in here to lie about their grandmas dying and nieces like getting injured? Like if you believe that, but you still trust the state and you still trust media, then you're always going to trust the wrong people. So I won't bother reading them all because everyone can go in there and read those comments. But y'all, oh yeah, New York Redneck says 19 watching and only 6 thumbs up. It says those are rookie numbers, folks. Thumbs up do help spread these messages. You know, I'm not too concerned with growth or anything like that. If my content is of value, it will reach the people it needs to reach. But
I
thumbs up
think
helps spread
everyone
the knowledge.
who has these stories of these vaccines should tell them.
Be brave and talk and don't and
Talk
quit,
about
quit
it.
worrying about people mocking you. One time, like when people make fun of you, consider the source. Do you really care what those kind of people think? You shouldn't. And even if you did care, even if you're risking your job, these are people's lives. It's your duty to stand up and start fighting this. Like we need to start growing pears in this world right now. These are hard times coming, and we need to like be ready to fight and take hits.
And if you don't have a voice, reach out to people who do. If you don't, you know, and some of them probably won't listen. Actually, most of them won't, but there will be people who will.
Yeah.
And it's just really a numbers game, I think.
So now that we've reached the end of some growing pears. Yeah, we do have several pears. We're planting pears out everywhere. They seem to do pretty well here. So we're going to grow lots of pears. I love pear sauce, and we can make pear wine and pear butters, all sorts of good things with pears. I don't much like them plain, but there's a billion things you can do with them. But let's go back to this topic of building into collapse. So we talked a little bit about like how natural building is probably a good idea, but also the synthesis between the two. Like maybe you're doing a cordwood or a log cabin, but you need to have that metal roof ready to go. You might use standard trusses, things like that. Whatever we build will probably be a synthesis of natural materials and what's around us. Cob housing is great. I've been hearing a lot of good things about hempcrete, aircrete. We really want to build something into the side of a hill, you know, do that earth shelter kind of thing. That's a great building technique for tornadoes, fireproofing, consistent temperature year round. But anyway, we talked about building. So I want to talk a little bit about building finances and becoming wealthy in collapse. Now, am I qualified to talk about that? Not exactly. We're not sitting here rolling in the dough. However, our finances have been improving for the last 3 years, and it seems to be on a track to continue doing so. And so none of that is rock solid. Like building wealth is not hard. That's why they have to work so hard to propagandize people to be idiots with their money, because it's actually really easy to become wealthy. Not to say it's also really easy to become poor. You know, I've been much more on the poverty side of things than wealth my whole life. But like I said, our finances have really improved these last 2 or 3 years. And I really buy into the Robert Kiyosaki idea of, and it's just common sense, of buying assets. Not into his whole everything he talks about. I don't much like debt and the things he uses, but buying assets is just common sense. Buy something that makes money.
Immediately.
Buy things that will immediately make you money.
Not like, oh, I have to put.
Yeah, not somewhere, because that's what I did with my first place. I bought my first property. Now it was the only one I could buy, and it still turned out okay. But I spent a year of effort, of labor, in starvation. I was in sheer poverty. I was hauling water up from a holler in a bucket and showering with that and doing laundry in a bucket and growing food because I didn't have money for food. I was truly poverty stricken and struggled really hard for a year. It paid off, and I built wealth because of that. But there are better ways to build wealth than to hurt yourself and make your life really hard. And so paying attention to buying an asset that will immediately generate wealth is a good idea. For example, we've been looking at this 20-acre site that we love. Beautiful. It's got 2 ponds. It's near us. It's like a great final homestead site. But we'll have to get a loan to get it, and it will use up all of our money. Just down the road, there's an old mobile home on about 1 acre that has frontage on 2 highways. It's a mess. It's not that pretty. It's not our dream property, but we can buy it in cash probably. And it's got all that frontage, and we can put our farm stand there. And we can repair that mobile home into a rental. So basically we have enough money to probably complete all of that stuff. So basically turnkey, you know, maybe 2 or 3 months down the road after buying it, it can be generating rental revenue, and all of the revenue for whatever we can grow. We can definitely sell at the farm stand because there's a ton of traffic right there, and we can really build a business from that property. If we do get that property, of course, we'll cover all of that because it's going to be kind of like our community center. And the center of the community we're trying to build out here. But all of that aside, it is an asset, an unconventional asset that can produce right away. Dave Ramsey would, of course, tell you never buy a single wide trailer, but like if you can find a decrepit single wide trailer, buy the heck out of that. Because another thing I like about building wealth, another way I can build wealth into collapse, is buying low income properties. Something with a place like this. That's why I bought this A-frame. It was our temporary house while we built our homestead. This property will always have value. Jesus said the poor will always be with us. So in good times or bad, you're pretty likely to always have somebody that can afford a little 360 square foot house on 1 acre that also has a garden and produces food abundantly, an hour from the city. So I love, like, if I had $1 billion tomorrow, I would still buy lots of little properties.
Even a house like the one we're building too.
Yeah, we're building a 2-bedroom, 576 square foot house because if the housing market crashes, but somebody can still get, I don't know what the equivalent of money will be in a few months, but like $125,000 loan, they could buy it. And so it puts it within reach of a lot of finance buyers and also cash buyers. So as you're building wealth, look for cheap properties. Like I've also talked about those $500 lots in Arkansas.
Yeah.
How the heck are you not going to sell a $500 lot at any point?
And you can make anything marketable. I think that's the thing that people lose sight of.
Plant it out like we do.
Most of the standard advice you'll give is just they're looking at the average buyer.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going. We're not going after the average buyer, and you're not going after the average.
We're selling to people like you, to preppers, to homesteaders, permaculture people.
Yeah. So think about what will the buyer I'm looking for want out of this property, and structure whatever you do that way.
And when it comes to buying assets, that doesn't necessarily mean, let's say you already have a property. So maybe buying an asset means bringing in a tractor for $5,000 to dig a pond that you're going to stock full of fish. Maybe it's by road and you have people come and fish for, or you're just eating the fish, or people are or you have a hip camp, or it's watering your entire property. That $5,000, you can do the math, and it's going to be an asset that pays off at an absurdly amazing rate. Maybe that's a shed that is going to be an Airbnb on your property, or it's going to store your crops, or maybe it's a greens harvester from Farmer's Friend, or a sieve that's going to help you harvest things to sell it to your neighbors. Maybe it's investing into chickens or a chicken coop to sell eggs or ducks. Animals are investments. They're animals properly done. If you're not bleeding money into your farm, if you're setting it up to be efficient using permaculture principles, you don't have a lot of inputs. So the profit calculations are easy. You're like, okay, I have let's say, for example, my chickens, the only input I need is feed for them. They're going to produce X amount of manure, X amount of eggs, X amount of meat. I can look at them and determine and look at the work and see if I can handle the workload and say, okay, that's an actual asset. So even if you're really, really poor, living in an apartment, you could buy some quail or some rabbits and put them in a cage and sneak them past the landlord. There's an asset. If you can get $500 together, you can go buy one of those properties in Arkansas. That's an asset. If you can get a truck to haul a trailer and you own a piece of machinery that you can then take that machinery, a sawmill around, say, for example, and you can mill lumber or rent it out to homesteaders, that's an asset. So assets can be very unconventional, especially in the homesteading world. And whatever your trade is, I'm a musician. I can't just go out and buy any guitar and consider it an asset if I'm being real. Now, I often lie to myself about that and buy guitars I don't need, but I can't just buy any tool of my trade and say it's an asset. But if I'm like, okay, I need a looping pedal because then I can do more solo shows and I can make a lot more money doing that without having to hire a guitarist, that looping pedal that costs $100 is an asset. So it comes down to the tiny purchases, the littlest purchases. Here we're drinking store-bought beer. Eventually, as we get our grain production going, we're going to buy beer making materials and we're going to make our own beer. One, for fun, for health, but also maybe I'll sell some beer to my neighbors. Remember, this in an agorist world, you don't have to have a brewery to sell beer. You don't have to have a distillery to sell corn liquor. And I'll leave that at that. You don't have to have a dispensary to sell things that you grow in the woods that are medicine that everybody, human has the right to grow. You don't have to have these big, so you can justify a small tool or a home brewing kit or a distillery kit. If you're truly serious about this, about building these revenue streams and building micro income streams and building a diverse homestead that produces fiat and other kinds of currency and food and materials abundantly, if you invest in those things, you're going to become wealthy. The Bible lines out all of these things too, how to become wealthy. Read Proverbs and if you follow that and you'll be rich. We're way behind on comments, I think.
Well, New York Redneck just said we're making our own beer and buying pigs solely for Oktoberfest.
I'm so excited. So excited. And we will, by the way, as far Oktoberfest reminds me about the festival we're planning, Back to the Land. After this 3-week rush, we'll be putting out content about that constantly. Just everything's on hold for this house build right now. Let's see.
Michigan Watch says, number one, son, you will never own property. That's why on the deed it says you're a tenant, not the owner.
Well, property is determined by defense. Can you defend your property? Can I defend my property against the whole government if I stop paying property taxes, which are illegal and illicit? Right now, I can't. Can I if I have a strong community of like-minded liberty people? Yeah. And in the end, I'll die for my freedom and my property, my home, and my family. So I do own that land because they won't remove me from my land that I paid for ever under any circumstances. So I own it more than I own my life because they can take my life before they can take my land, and maybe that will happen someday. Also, there are other ways to get land. Churches do not pay taxes. Church associations do not pay taxes. Some states, veterans over a certain age don't pay taxes. You can lease something for a long time. You can go save up your money for 5 years and go talk to your county and say, oh, are you financially distressed? Let me bail you out with $100,000 and you go ahead and sign a 1,000-year, 100-year off my taxes. There's ways. But in the end, we need to remove government because property taxes are immoral and they're slavery because they're saying that they own your land and they don't. The state doesn't own your land. You do.
Reliance on Trust says making beer is fun. Tastes way better than the Starbucks.
Well,
stuff.
you're in Oregon. You got all the good hops, all the good grains.
We did drive by someone.
Yeah,
the other
somebody's
day
growing hops out
growing
here. I thought it was
here.
too hot. I need
Yeah.
to look into that. Oregon. I grew up in Oregon in the country, and Oregon is prime hop country, and that's why everyone makes fun of all the hipster beers there. But they are actually they are a product that belongs there because that's where the hops are grown, and so that's why there's such a rich culture of beautiful beers over there in Oregon. Sorry, our puppy dog's trying to escape here, Holly.
She knows how to open the door.
We had to have her locked up a little bit longer than normal because we're working all day. I'm going to take this and read a few of these. Reliance on Trust says, make soap. That's one of our projects we want to tackle here pretty soon. And he also says, dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money bit by bit makes it grow. Absolutely. Gabby's grown up in the marketing world. And so I've got to see firsthand or secondhand the insanity and the greed that drives people into that and how they exploit people by, and I've seen it in YouTube video ads, you probably have, where it's like some guy standing in front of a Ferrari with two hot babes in bikinis. Yeah, that he definitely rented. And he's just like, look at me, you can have this lifestyle, just buy my program or whatever, or join my MLM and my pyramid scheme, and you can have all this too. Yeah, we all, a fool and his money are soon parted. Building wealth slowly, like I've always been a get-rich-quick schemer, and it never went anywhere for me in life. And then when I said F it,
just really.
Yeah, and just building things we cared about too. That's part of it, is like building things we believe in and are passionate and care about. Because we're like, well, if we're going to put in all this time, and that's the other thing. I think the beauty of it is like, if I'm going to build wealth slowly, I don't want to be working doing jobs I don't like. For me, it was I didn't want to be playing music I didn't like anymore. I was in the pop country world. Yeah. I was doing the radio tours and chasing the labels, and miserable. I hated it, and I wasn't playing the kind of music I liked. When I stopped doing that and started writing the kind of and singing the kind of songs I like and only playing with people I liked, my music career has actually drastically been improving really rapidly, as is my creative content and my audience building and everything. So at every level, like when you take it, go slow and build wealth properly without trying to cheat and methodically, you build wealth. You're gonna it's tried and true formula, even in collapse. Anybody can build wealth. Anybody can do it. Doesn't matter their background. It doesn't matter their education, what their family structure was. If they wake up and decide to get serious and just research on how to build wealth and do it slowly, just following guys like Dave Ramsey or Kiyosaki, any of those guys, it's not complicated.
Yeah, and there's different reasons to build wealth, which kind of dictate how much wealth you really need to build. You know, like Matt and I talk a lot about how we build wealth because we see it as a way to be able to have our creative outlets and also freedom to do whatever we want to do and build businesses the way we want to build them and not feel like we're working for other people.
We're building freedom.
That is what really, for the most part, guides how we build things, how we do our garden, like everything. It kind of dictates everything that we do.
Yeah.
Is because we're trying to create kind of those optimal circumstances to be kind of as creative as we want to be.
I would recommend it to, and when we talk about being creative and things like that, like Gabby's a writer, I'm a musician, so we're artsy people, but all of this applies to you if you're a carpenter or a woodworker or like everybody. If you don't have a passion, you just haven't found it yet, and you need to go on a quest. You know, you need to find out. You need to try things. But you probably know what your passion is. You know, maybe
or like it can even be like I'm really into running, and like I keep telling Matt I love long endurance things, but obviously you have to train for those. Yeah. That takes like hours. You know, it can take half your day sometimes, and so that's one thing that I also want to get more into.
And she's been studying to get a personal training thing, so she can take that passion, because we also have more than one passion. Gabby's a writer, but she's also a runner. So if she's going to invest time in running and energy and loves it, why not monetize it? So and everybody, a lot of people just need to quit denying. There's a lot of homesteaders like this that work really hard, but they need to quit denying and lying to themselves about what they want to do. And this isn't a fairy tale about like, oh, do you love underwater basket weaving? Just quit your job. No, but you need to transition and start a basket weaving business over time. You know, you transition into it. But there's very few passions that you can't monetize.
Yeah, I think we were like taught that it's totally unrealistic, and it's not.
And think about how unconventional that can be. I just met a guy the other day who loves trains. That's the most hobby thing you can do. Like the little miniature trains, building the train sets. How do you monetize that? Not a lot of ways. But he has a business in town, and he built a whole side of his business just with the trains. kids want to come in and see it. People want to come in and see it.
And
they
I'm
talk
sure
with
he
him, get
gets-
to know him, and they buy his products from his
Yeah,
electronics
and he
company.
probably gets repeat customers because the kids love the train so much that
Yeah.
the parents keep taking them.
Yeah, I
to
just
there.
realized all that that's a business model. Yeah,
Yeah.
so there is no passion that can't be monetized in
can't
some
be.
way.
Yeah.
And then it gives you a license to also learn more about it. So I would, if you're not there yet, I would think about it and be like, what's my 5-year plan? Because like, what can't you do in 5 years?
Mhm.
You can build it. Anybody can build a business if they're passionate about it in 5 years. So just make a plan and make that business happen. Make it resilient. Make sure it's going to work and collapse too. Hi from Knoxville, Teatown Mountain. Love me some Knoxville. We played at a brewery down there the other day and just had a blast. Well, we had a good tab given to us, so we might have had a blast because of that. But I do love Knoxville. Love the bluegrass and the traditions that come out of that place. If I wasn't here, I'd be in the Appalachians. I love that place. Just love Knoxville. They changed the rule. Oh, that's in regards to another one. I own a mortgage. The bank owns the property, but I'm still betting on hyperinflation. And then New York Rednecks responds with, they just changed the rules looking at Mexico in 1994. The banker never loses. Chapter 11, Rule 11 of Monopoly. But yes, I'm not, I hate debt, but I'm also not against the idea of a mortgage because you can let in inflation, the value of your loan, the money that you owe becomes worth less. So you owe less. So a lot of people do use that, but also it's like, are you going to be able to bring in enough money to finance a mortgage in collapse when all the jobs go away? Right now we have too many jobs. It's almost like the job market itself has inflated, and that's probably going to swing away. The pendulum will go quite far in the other direction. And so just make sure you have a diverse set of income streams if you're going to have that are resilient and in any scenario, if you're going to have a mortgage. Of course, there are also ways to own mortgages without having them attached to your name. You could have a business that has the mortgage. You could have a nonprofit that has the mortgage. So there are ways to utilize your debt without attaching it to your name. Also, there's ways to maybe if you're married, maybe you never bothered going asking state for permission. So maybe you're married truly in God's eyes, but not the state's eyes. And maybe the assets can shift one way or another if somebody got sued or something like that. Or if you lost your house, you can sell it to a person. Anyway, there's a lot of ways to go about it. We're leery of debt and we try to avoid it ourselves a lot because we just don't want to deal with the people who are selling money, because that's kind of the enemy. But there are ways to do it properly if you're going to do it, for sure. And I wouldn't criticize anybody for doing it. I've had many loans. I've been in debt. I have about $1,000 on a credit card right now as we finish up this house. So sometimes you just cannot avoid utilizing debt. It's just a reality sometimes. But I do think the faster you can get out of it, the faster you're actually building wealth. Because you're not really like, if you're making 10% on an investment over here, but you're losing 10% on your house over here on your mortgage, you're not really making any money. So your better investment would be just pay off your mortgage and turn the house into an asset. And also loans limit you. Like if you don't have a mortgage on a property, it's easier to do things like subdividing it and developing, and you don't have to ask permission from anybody. So the sooner you can free yourself from debt, the better.
Using as little as you can.
Yeah, but it is a reality we all face sometimes. And right now, let's say I had a normal job, and I'd had it for a couple of years and I had like a few thousand in the bank, but I didn't have any savings other than that, I would go ahead and get a house with a mortgage right now. If that was the position I was in. If I could qualify for a loan, I would buy a very modest house on a modest but good sized piece of property in a rural area, like an acre, 5 acres, not in the suburbs, but just outside of the suburbs or deep in the country. And then quickly just hit diversification of income hard. Like plant out the garden, find what you're good at growing, make a commercial crop, put up a farm stand, practice your skills, build new skills, go do a little work for an excavation guy down the road or the farm up the road. Go do a little work now and then when you see an ad on a community group or something, and get some other employment connections. Like when the pandemic hit and the tyrants came in and shut down the music industry under point of a gun, when that all happened, I knew a few people and I started working on an excavation crew right away. And I had these fallbacks income wise. I had barrels to sell. I had lessons going, and that's the only thing that got me through. And that's why I was able to actually bought this at the beginning of it and was able to preserve my wealth and keep growing it because of my diversification of my income.
Yeah.
And I own my income. It wasn't jobs, it was skills.
Yeah. And I did the same thing too, even though I have a full-time employer. During the pandemic, I wrote a lot for our local newspaper. I did a lot of kind of one-off articles for people. So always, even though I had a full-time job, always keeping kind of different, venues and options open was definitely helpful.
And I would consider building skills, building wealth. Like I went and
Mhm.
studied permaculture last year. I'll probably do more study into that this year. Maybe I'm trying to decide. Also, our fire department is offering, we have the opportunity to study like swift water rescue.
Yep.
Who knows when that'll come in handy. Later on, I'll probably go ahead, even though I used to be an EMT, but I'll probably get my first responder again because all of that has lapsed. So I'll go refresh all of those medical skills, which are crucial in times like this and very valuable. For example, like if you have an EMT, you could work as an EMT, but also if the society really downgraded fast, you would still have valuable skills. Like if we're in medieval times and you're the expert gardener in the village, when that invading army comes through, they're not going to kill you. They're like, where's the gardener? And they're going to keep you around. I mean, that's just a metaphor, but like when you have valuable skills, you become invaluable. I fell in love. Fuquay says, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I fell in love with Tennessee as a teen and stayed. Yeah, I fell in love with it. I came here for the music. I stayed for the cheap property values. The ticks almost chased me out, but all the abundant water and soil brought me back. And by the way, Middle Tennessee, all this rolling hill is good soil. I don't care what people say. It's heavy clay. It's got lots of rocks, but I'm growing a whole lot of food really easy out there. You just have to mulch and don't try to grow commodity crops. Grow things the way humans are supposed to grow things, diversely and close and by hand as much as possible. But it's rich soil. It's very rich, especially this area because modern agriculture has not destroyed this hilly. We're kind of like not the Appalachians quite, but like really hilly out here. So it's not really practical. It's not like the Delta where they're just like monocrops, cotton, soybeans, corn. There's none of that up here. It's mostly just like small old tobacco farms that like don't grow anything anymore. They're just like old families that still live there and don't grow much. So this area is phenomenal for homesteading because of all the small lots that are still like good sized farms. And the fact that we don't have pesticides everywhere, our water is still pretty clean. The wildlife is still here. It's not decimated like a lot of the upper Midwest and a lot of these and the Delta and all of these areas where we've been throwing pesticides and poisons into the land for so long. We'll also be starting a 501c3 safe house for children that have been abused, raped, and under a death threat. That's a beautiful thing. I think actually, sadly, as society disintegrates, there's going to be more trauma, there's going to be more crime, there's going to be more broken families, which we're seeing that around us. And so we need to answer these things. If you're a Christian, it's your job. If you're an anarchist, it's your point. Like you need to show that we can, we have a self-funded fire department out here, and we work hard to keep it funded. We have a fire department. We work with government, but the government doesn't give us any money. The only thing they pay for is insurance, which they require. So we need to be the answer for not just the problems that are coming up. We need to be the leaders in our communities, but we also need to say, look, we don't need to use force and violence. We don't need to steal people's money and then apply it to pay firefighters or police or programs like that, social services. Communities will take care of their own, and they always have.
We need to get people used to paying for that stuff.
Yes, again, and come up with creative ways. We were learning about a nearby fire department that is also self-funded by a wonderful family and a church out there, and they buy old fire equipment and then they resell it at a profit. They're running a business for their nonprofit and they're funding it that way. So they're not even doing fundraisers or asking anybody for money. So there's a lot of creative ways. We're looking at helping a community center. I might have talked last time about the community garden we started. We're looking at the possibility of starting another one on an old community center that's like falling down. It's in a very small community, very rural, that doesn't have any life left in it. Nobody's taking care of it. And we were talking about the idea of building a farm stand there on the site. It's near a highway, and driving traffic to it, and then having all the neighbors, because there's a lot of older folks that probably care about it out there, fill up that farm stand. We'll bring our own vegetables to it and even grow food on site, sell it at the farm stand, and let that fund the rebuilding of that community center while drawing all that life and activity back to it. So there's a lot of ways to fund those kinds of things, and props to you for doing that. It's awesome. Bear Independent has a good 501c3 called Caleb House for that reason. Yeah, everybody needs a nonprofit. The elites have been using nonprofits for a long time. But when you do it, it shouldn't be just for like a tax shelter or something. It should be for like good reasons too, because we all want to do good, and it's a fun way to do it because your nonprofit can build wealth. Like you just fund it with a little seed money, maybe buy a $1,500 lot in the South or something, or whatever, buy that asset for your nonprofit. And create a way for the nonprofit to start generating its own money, because then you can still do good and you can still benefit yourself with a nonprofit. You can pay yourself a salary. You can do all of that. Of course, it's taxable then, but you can still pay yourself from the nonprofit. So you haven't lost any of that money. You just have to use it more creatively. But whatever stays inside of the nonprofit is tax free. Just don't cheat. Follow the system, look at how it goes, and use it properly, and be serious about it, because we do need to do good in the world. Let's see. Homesteading the Heartland says, have you guys heard of becoming an American sovereign national and denouncing U.S. citizenship? Get back on the land, no taxes. Heard about this back by Supreme Court, apparently. I started to dig into a lot of that. There's a lot of conflicting opinions, and there's so much information out there. Right now, I'm focused on the reality of it, which is like I can use whatever legal gimmicks I want, but in the end, the state's got more guns and more power than me, and they're going to try to oppress me. So instead, I'm going to build self-sufficiency fast, because freedom, liberty, power, all these things are really just dependent on force. And I'm not prepared to answer them back yet and to protect myself from them. So my first priority is preparing my household, preparing my community. And, this community around us is shaping up to be a community that will protect itself.
Mm-hmm.
We're meeting all the people who are like-minded. And in all of the counties around us, there's some great channels. There's a great channel down in, I think, Benton County near us, Special Operations Equipment, and there's Freedom Inc., both great channels. Nearby, there's a lot of people. What's the T-Rex Arms is a phenomenal channel based right here in this county. Big family that is strong family. They have a lot of manufacturing capabilities. There's a lot of people in these areas who are now prepared to say no. So really, to me, independence is rooted in reality, which is related. Basically, what can you defend realistically? Being an anarchist, I've had my phase where I was like, let's go overthrow the government, and went through that phase, but I'm not in that phase anymore. I don't think that's realistic, because a revolution, when a tire revolves, it goes in a circle. It doesn't stop, it revolves, it's a circle. A revolution brings the cycle back around. It's just more of the same. We don't need a revolution. We have to get off the wheel. And that's kind of a vague answer, but I don't think the answer is to overthrow any government anywhere in the world. I think it's to say this region is going to be really hard for you to operate in, and you don't even need violence to do that. A lot of ground, the Nazis partially failed because their supply lines failed, because people were in all of these countries like France and stuff cutting supply lines and just doing, they weren't blowing up people, they were just blowing up a rail line here, a road there. And then resistance can be passive. Look at Gandhi. Look what he accomplished. Look what MLK Jr. accomplished. Passive resistance and targeted, careful resistance that doesn't hurt people can make your area unworkable and ungovernable. And I think that's really all we need, and kind of all we can do, because so much of the populace is so brainwashed and so far gone to this point. But that's really doable in some areas. You're probably not going to accomplish that very well in Oregon. You're probably not going to accomplish it in California or New York. Maybe on the eastern side of Oregon and some of those states. Idaho, maybe. Utah, maybe. The whole South, absolutely, except for maybe Virginia, because they're so much up the whole of Washington, D.C. But we can really make this happen. We can make a region of the country that's really hard to govern, where we can just be free. And we can just grow food, help our neighbors, not hurt people, not point a gun at somebody to take their money, not force anybody's labor. We can step aside from this whole neo-feudalistic fake Marxist revolution that's happening. We can step aside from the rise of a global government.
To get back to our roots.
But all of that, yes, that's what started me on that.
To get back to our communities, really. The
meek shall inherit the earth. And so we need to get a little meeker. We need to grow our food. We need to build our communities before we can do any of that. And we need to help our communities. Our community here is broken. We need to fix our community before we can say we don't need government. What right do we have to say that we don't need government if we haven't made an answer, if we haven't funded our own fire department, if we don't have people ready to help other people, if we can't feed people? That's why we're planting out community gardens. That's why we're doing all of this stuff. People think an anarchist is an Antifa hoodlum breaking windows. No, an anarchist is building. They're building communities. They're building solutions. They're helping people. They're feeding the hungry. They're taking in the orphans. They're feeding the people that need food. They're bringing clean water to people. They're the solution. They're showing that anarchy will work, that we've been lied to for all of our prehistory, that really life was better before the rise of the industrial age, which I think is true. I think you can go back and prove that lifespans were not as short as they say. I think we were healthier and lived longer and lived much better before the Industrial Revolution, before the rise of states and big totalitarian governments and empires. So that got me onto a long rant, but it was fun. Let's see if we have any last comments. We are reaching an hour, and it is the homestead hour. Gabby just pulled the French fries out of the oven, so we had a good potato harvest so far. We pulled We pulled some of them early because they're starting to die, and we only have 3 more weeks on the site, so we're harvesting everything early. So we're getting lots of little potatoes early.
Our lives require a lot of multitasking.
JT
right now.
says we need to get rid of the 2-party system. We need to get rid of the system. The Constitution is just a piece of paper, absolutely, and I didn't sign it. I use the Constitution to say, hey, our government is not constitutional, therefore it's void and invalid. It's a good legal argument, but in the end, the Constitution isn't relevant to me. I did not sign it, and it's a contract that I didn't sign. So I'm not a slave. I only abide by contracts that I sign. And when I sign a contract, I abide by it no matter what. That's if you are abiding by a contract you didn't sign and you don't want to follow, you're a slave. Okay, a few more comments here. Revolutionary actions are what's going to happen and may be necessary. Civil war is unnecessary, and the fruition of propaganda system creating revolutionary acts. Absolutely. The Civil War narrative has been pushed for a long time because that's what they want. They want racial and party divides and people fighting each other, not them. And revolutionary acts, it just depends on what's your matter of definition, If you do take some kind of action that prevents, let's say, DHS from seizing unvaccinated kids from somebody's house, maybe some sugar gets in the gas tank of that truck while it's out driving around. Is that a revolutionary act? I don't know, but enough of those acts are what prevent a lot of tyranny. So it just depends on how you define revolutionary act. I used to really be gung-ho about let's just march into DC and get this done with, but people want a state. People want tyranny. What are you going to do about that? You can overthrow every government you want. People want tyranny. They're just going to bring it back. Mm-hmm. We need to build a place where there is none, and we show that it can be done. And we need to raise a generation that's not going to be governed, that understands all of this, because none of this is rocket science. It took a lot of brainwashing to trick us into this. Okay, let's see. You're right. It's a big hamster wheel. Yep. Bad things make strong men make good times make weak men. Yeah, it's the cycle. But I think we can break the cycle. If you're a Christian, I think that's what Revelation is about. We break the cycle. We are the hands and feet of Christ, and when he returns, maybe it's a literal form, or maybe it's metaphorical, or both, and maybe it returns in our actions and how we act. Jesus was an anarchist too, but he preached passive resistance, but he did resist the system, and I think he knew exactly what was going to happen, and he knew exactly the patterns of history and where things were going, and that this is the apex we would reach, where we would reach a global state and true totalitarianism, and it's promised that it will collapse, and that those of us that are meek and that listen, we will inherit the earth. So we don't know how metaphorical that is or how literal it is. I'm not a preacher, but it's just like prepping. You prepare for every scenario. And it seems like it always comes down to be self-sufficient. Have your water sources. Have your food source. Be prepared to produce value. Be prepared to defend and take care of your family. We can preach pacifism all day, but if police fail, what are you going to do when somebody's murdering your neighbors next door? What are you going to do if they're hurting a child? Are you really going to be a pacifist? In the end, we're going to have to answer all of these questions and realize we probably have to build a new world here at some point and decide, how do we decide what to do with these? Do we just build another government? Do we just do the same thing? I would say no. I would say we return back to what societies have been for millennia. There were respected judges who could pass down opinions, but there was no enforcement of law. And that's a better system for people. It's better for everybody. Less hungry people, healthier people, happier people. I believe that, and I want to prove it with our lifestyles and what we're doing in this community.
Because I think a lot of us have been passing the buck onto other people.
Yeah, you act all day like you would not be violent, but you call the police on your neighbor, who then comes and shoots your neighbor.
It's you're just a
coward. Yeah, you're still killing your neighbor. You're just a coward about it. That's the only difference. So yeah, people, we're going to have to answer these questions in our generation. I do believe. And if we don't answer them, I think we
should have always been answering that. We would have had a lot more empathy for other people if we were asking ourselves those questions.
Because when you realize that you're responsible for your neighbor's well-being, it really changes the equation. And I see it all over, because this is a rural, economically one of the poorest places in Tennessee. And neighbors, they feed their neighbors. People take care of people. It happens way more here than in the city, because they know it's their responsibility. They know that people fall through the cracks. And that's what led me to believe all of this, and why I want to back it all up. And I think we can prove it. I think we can show that we are better off without government. Truly, everybody is better off without government, except for the most insidious, narcissistic, and malicious members of society. They're better off with government because that's a tool for them, because they can use violence against people. All right, y'all. We got pretty far off there, but this was a really fun one. I had a lot of fun on this community hour. It is time for us to go. We're exhausted. We have been drywalling all day. We're still in our work clothes. We literally ran here. We're covered in drywall dust. And we have French fries that are going cold. So it's time to get back to them. Thank you for so many cool comments. So much, I have to go through and read all the comments again after these live streams. There's so much good gravy in there. So everyone, thank you very much for being a part of this and joining the live stream. Thank you for putting up with my lack of content. We will get more content. We have a lot of content coming. Just these 3 weeks are crazy. So thank you for sticking with us. And we'll see you hopefully sooner than the next one. But in the meantime, stay safe, everybody. Be well and happy homesteading.